I'm just going to let this Zoom meter out. Okay, we are good to go. All right. It's top of the hour straight up. I'm Kevin. I'm the community lead at Sequence, and we are super stoked to be joined by Barry Moltz today. Barry has been a fixture on TV and written bestsellers and has talked more about small business than we will absolutely have any chance of encompassing today. But I feel like, especially with things being, the world being as complicated as it is today, Barry, we're going to have a lot to talk about. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. So, first, just a quick side note of housekeeping for you guys who are sitting in. If you have questions for Barry, if you'll just drop those into chat, we'll pick those up toward the end. But why don't we start for anyone who maybe hasn't caught you on CNBC or MSNBC or maybe read one of your books yet? Can you tell us a little bit about your career and what you've been doing? What brought you to this point?
Sure. I mean, if you haven't read any of my books, you're just like my wife because she says that I don't need to read your books. I live with you. So, I started my career at IBM. Initially, I wanted to be president of IBM. I wanted to go the corporate route. I wanted to wear the blue suit and the white shirt and the red tie, sometimes a blue tie. But then I read a book about starting a business, and it really hooked me. So I left IBM to go work for another small business. And then a year later, when this CEO fired me, I said, I can do this myself. So I started three small businesses. The first one went out of business. The second one actually was kicked out by my two partners a couple weeks before my first son was born. And then I started my third business actually 2 weeks after my first son was born because I couldn't help myself. And I was fortunate during the internet bubble to sell that business. I was able to pay back the $1.3 million I owed to the bank. And my wife tells me I got her back just about the same time. So that's kind of been the arc of my career since leaving large corporations about 30 years ago.
That's amazing. Well, and felt like I think one of the great things about what I have read about your story are just how transparent and honest you've been about like figuring it out along the way, which is something that all small business owners have to do. I find myself thinking a little bit about the difference between you starting your first company and your third company. Obviously, it sounds like based on what you just told us that the third company was something that you started right on the heels of getting out of the second one. What was the difference in your mindset between, by the time that you got to starting that third org?
In the second business, I actually found my two business partners in the classified section when there were classified sections of the Chicago Tribune. And I would tell you that you should never find your business partners in the classified section of the newspaper or any classified section because who you're doing business with is more important than what you're doing. My third business, I actually started with someone I knew in college, her husband. He and I really grooved. We found a pay in the market. We grew it for 6 years. And then, in 1999, anybody that was in e-commerce, let's be honest, could sell their business for a lot of money. So timing is also really important.
Yeah, totally makes obviously timing can never be underestimated. Speaking of timing, all right, so we you have positioned yourself and talked a lot about sort of the art and the science of getting unstuck. What are some ways that you like? Let's start at the very beginning here. Like, what are some ways that you find that small business owners tend to get stuck along the way?
I think it's interesting. Most small businesses have enough success to keep going, financial success to keep going, but aren't getting rich like they thought they would, or aren't getting the enjoyment like they thought they would. And people get stuck in five major areas. The first one is sales and marketing. The second one is leadership and management, around finance or money, in the customer experience, and then in time management. So, what I've been talking to people about the last 20 years, depending on where their most pressing need is how do you get unstuck in each of those areas?
Okay, well let's unpack that a little bit. Like
Sure.
one of the things that before we start talking about like sort of those specific items, one of the things that you also said that really stayed with me was the idea that sometimes as small business owners, we know what the right move is, but we don't take that action. So how do you connect like getting past fear and moving toward, a bias for action?
Yeah, I wrote a whole book called Change Masters, how to take the next step when you actually know what to do. There's ch change is hard. Your brain is a pattern making machine and it wants to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again because it feels like it's safe. I have found over the course of my career, people only make changes when they're in incredible pain. And through that incredible pain, they actually will make some type of change. So I try to figure out, or I help them figure out what's really driving this pain. What can't you stand anymore that you've got to make this change, that you can't go on? And what I suggest to people is something I call striving for minimal achievement. Everyone wants to strive for maximal achievement, but I want people to strive for minimal achievement because I want them to take some very small steps, small iterative steps to really get where they want to go. Just make, what's the first thing I have to do that in order to make this change, the smallest step you can imagine, right? Um, let's say that you've never read your financial statements. What's really the first step? The first step isn't to understand how to read financial statements. The first step is, all right, let me look up on ChatGPT what the purpose of financial statements are, right? And then maybe I should understand what accounts receivable is or accounts payable is. Sometimes when you try to make too big of changes, it's just overwhelming and people are frozen.
Okay, so taking that into account, you talked a little bit about leveraging AI, which is something that I think we should come back to at some point. But you know, the thing that I keep sort of skirting around, but I think is sort of the elephant in the room, is that like economically, this is a weird time. Like there's a lot of uncertainty that may change, it may not change. What do you recommend for small business owners, just to, generally speaking, to try and buttress themselves again in an uncertain marketplace?
Yeah, I think the worst thing that there can be in the market is really uncertainty. And of course, with this particular president, you don't know what's going to happen on a daily basis because every day is a reality TV show. So I'm not sure if the tariffs, Kevin, are on today or off today, or there are new tariffs that are implemented. And that's really hard for small business because they can't really plan. That being said, I think there's certain things that you really can do. And we can talk specifically, about the tariffs if you believe that your costs are going to go up. I think it's important at this time to understand how are the tariffs in the particular countries, whether they're on or they're off, can affect your costs and how much you have to increase your costs. And are there alternate suppliers? Can you buy ahead of the curve? Do you have enough cash flow in order to buy some inventory before the tariffs go into effect? Because they could not be in effect the next day. I don't know. But we have to control only what we can control. And I think that the small business owner, or while most of them are not very good at planning, this is really when we have to plan and try to control the things we can control.
Stands to reason. Okay, so given that, and that there's a lot of sort of gray area there that we can't unpack in a bespoke way for everybody in their individual industries. Like you talk a lot about profitable growth for small businesses. Let's define what that looks like. Like,
Yeah.
can you get into some specifics?
Yeah, I mean, there's an expression that says, sales are vanity, cash flow is sanity, right? Too many small business owners focus on, oh, what's the top line? How much is my business growing? I have people focus on the profit in their business. How much money are they making? How much money they have left over? And particularly the cash flow, right? How much money? So, for example, in the beginning of the month versus the end of the month, has their cash increased? And especially during difficult times, I was just reading this morning how for the first time, I think in since COVID, the GDP growth was negative, right? You got two negative GDP quarters. That means by definition, we're in a recession. And so if we're coming up on a recession, you have to emphasize cash. You have to hoard cash. And cash isn't sales because you don't get cash until someone pays you and you pay the person or the product for delivering that service or product. So you need to focus on cash. And this is where a lot of small business owners don't understand how to read a cash flow statement. There's three basic financial statements, profit and loss statement, or sometimes it's called the income statement, the balance sheet, and then the cash flow statement. Cash flow statement says how much money they have at the beginning of the month versus how much money they have at the end of the month based on how my profit and accounts receivable and accounts payable, or if I got any loans or other cash injections. So we have to focus on cash flow because if you have cash during recession, typically things get cheaper and you'll be able to take advantage of some of the market conditions.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and it's that little silver lining, like the idea of things getting cheaper, and maybe that there are some supplies that are maybe taste change, maybe the supply chains evolve in a way that we don't anticipate. That's actually kind of interesting. All right. Well, generally speaking, like, what are you? So you like your most was Change Masters the most recent book?
It was.
Okay, so with Change Masters, I actually thought that the most interesting part of that particular title was the subhead, which was like how to actually make the changes you already know that you need to make. We talked about that a little bit. Um, why do you feel like some, and this is, I'll just revisit this for a second. Like, why do you feel like some owners resist change when they know that it's due?
Well, I think it's fear. I mean, you go back on a personal level, why do so many people stay married or stay in a relationship that they know they should get out of? Right? They sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. It's the fear of what's ever on the other side. That's why I always say that people only make changes when they absolutely have no choice, that they can't imagine staying where they are, that they have no choice but to move forward and try something different, no matter what happens.
Stands to
Fear
reason.
holds people back.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of those deals too, where it can be, I read something the other day that was talking about like a small business owner raised their hand and said, "Hey, I feel stuck and I'm trying to figure something out." And part of the peanut gallery said, "Make a list of the things that you are trying to accomplish and then go after the big one first." And I thought like that sort of feels like it harkens back to what you were talking about small incremental change and just doing one thing that you can look back at the end of the day and go like, okay, I really did something that was important
I mean,
for my business today.
I think you have to go after the small ones first. I mean, I'm a long distance cyclist, and when I go out to train to ride 180 miles across Illinois in one day, I don't go out and say, all right, I'm going to ride 180 miles. I go and say, I'm going to ride 10 miles, then I'm going to ride 12 miles, then I'm going to ride 15 miles, right? And I think that sometimes in American society, we strive too far too fast. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive far, but if we do it in small, patient, iterative steps, it gives us more confidence and we have more of a chance to succeed in the long run.
Makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about trends in the marketplace, things that you see changing that are maybe on the upswing, things that are like, is there buyer behavior that you think has been particularly interesting? Are there industries that you see thriving in uncertain times?
Well, I think that, anybody that sells any kind of physical product that's produced outside the United States, I see that a lot of those businesses are trying to buy ahead of the curve. So they're investing their cash in inventory. So hopefully they'll have enough inventory and then maybe the tariffs will be taken off. I'm also seeing, consumers actually, I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately, but at least here in Scottsdale, there's a lot of shelves that are empty. Again, people are starting to hoard things. I mean, if you just go into the egg aisle, right? Eggs are so expensive, but there are also there are no eggs there. We also see people having a problem planning. They don't want to make any big investments, right? Because they're afraid what's going to happen with the future. A lot of small business owners are saying to myself, well, I know I need a bigger space, I need to expand, but I'm afraid to sign a long-term lease. So again, I think uncertainty is difficult for small business owners. And when their confidence is down, that really affects the whole cycle.
Yeah, that's true. And I do kind of see the emergence of community in some of these conversations. Like you take your egg example, like it's not uncommon and I'm in Austin, Texas, like it's not uncommon here to have situations where people are sharing places where the eggs are a little bit cheaper if you've got more than one option. So um it is whatever it takes a lot of us and folks are sharing information and there are a lot of places where you can get information. So I think that's helpful. Let's talk a little bit about scaling and the speed of scaling. And you've spoken about this in other discussions. I think this is really important. Like, how do you manage the rate at which you're growing and manage it in a way that is sustainable?
Yeah, I think that the speed of scaling, especially during difficult times, is totally overrated. I think that you have to grow slowly and profitably, or you can grow quickly, but you have to grow profitably. But remember, the quicker you grow, the more cash you're going to need because you're always going to have to invest ahead of the sales or growth curve. So you have to make sure that you have enough money, either profits or investment from other people, to be able to invest in that growth. The problem is a lot of times people invest in that growth and the growth doesn't happen. So all they're doing is just funding losses. And that's a problem because somewhere along the line, you're going to run out of money. We have to understand, Kevin, that every single small business goes out of business for the exact same reason. They run out of cash, right? So if you run out of cash, you're kind of dead. And if you grow too fast, that really hurts your cash flow. And at some point, you may have to pull back and you may not want to, you may have to pull back in the middle of a growth cycle, and that could be dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've talked a little bit about general growth. We've talked about cash flow profitability. Like if there are no silver bullets out there. The joke that I make a lot is that like we all have 1,000 cable channels. Consumers are nuanced. They are smart and they understand choice. Like in that sort of complicated, nuanced world, you also come from a background of sales and marketing. Like how do you start to differentiate, especially if you're a small business owner in a larger marketplace?
Well, first of all, my question, Kevin, is we have 1,000 channels. How come there still is nothing on?
Right.
Right?
Well,
I mean, when we had
yeah.
3 channels, there was nothing on. Now there's 1,000 channels, we have nothing on. I think that I tell all small business owners, you got to really figure out the pain you solve and who you solve it for, right? You can't do what you're interested in. Well, you should do what you're interested in, but you can't do what you're interested in only, right? You have to find out what pain do I solve? Because remember, people pay a lot more money for painkillers than they do for vitamin or candy. So for example, about 5 months ago, I shattered my knee. I had to go into an ambulance, had to go to the emergency room, right? I didn't ask them how much is this going to cost, right? I was in a lot of pain. I said, give me the ketamine. That's really what I want. I don't care what it costs. When if you're in a legal situation, you're not necessarily asking what's the lawyer going to cost. You want to get out of that legal situation. So if you can focus in on what pain do you solve, and then who do you solve it for, and do they have the money to pay to solve the pain? Because if they don't have the money to pay to solve the pain, then where are you? You don't really have a business. So you really have to focus on that and focus on a core set of customers first before you overexpand into a lot of different customers. One of the things that small business owners do, they try to be everything to everybody, and then they're no one to nobody. And it gets to be a real problem. So start off slowly and just focus where you really want to be.
And then how do you go about making those determinations? I mean, I think on the community side, we talk a lot about talking to the people who are there and getting to know them and understanding what their motivations and their North Star is. But when you're trying to figure out the business model and what your lane looks like what do you recommend for folks trying to navigate that situation?
Well, it's always good to ask people and do research, but somewhere along the line, you have to make an offer. You have to see if people are actually going to part with their money and buy something from you. Because I found a lot of people, when you survey and you say, "Hey, would you buy that product?" You go, "Yeah, sure, I'd buy that product." When it comes down to buying it, Kevin, no one buys it. So you have to put the offer out there, and that's a lot of small business owners have a problem with that because finally their business plan, their product or service has to get tested in the marketplace and they don't want to hear no. But I will tell you that you've got to hear no before you get to yes. See it as a series of experiments to see what works and what doesn't work, and then build on the things that work. If you do that long enough, you will find what works and the people that really have the pain and they will buy your product or service.
Years ago, this is a weird sidebar, but years ago, I did some work with a company that, or got to know the principals of a company that made flavored collagen.
Hmm.
And so it's like a pretty boring market, and it's
Yeah.
like typical like, but mostly like women 40 and up, and it collagen had never been flavored before. And so what they they sort of stumbled on uh, a conversation that was happening among a constituency, and they managed to make a business because a blogging housewife in the Midwest went crazy about it, and she had a big following. It's a weird, unusual story, but the reason I bring it up is like there are a lot of tiny niches that feel very narrow on the outset from the outside, but actually end up being really lucrative. Um, what has your experience been, or what recommendations would you make for folks who are getting close to figuring out? Okay, I think that based on what I know, there seems to be a very specific type of audience that would be interested in my product. We know it has to be validated. Like, how do you move forward?
You got to launch, right? Again, somewhere along the line, you have to ask people, will you buy this product or service and then deliver it and see how it goes? You've got to. It's the only way to test your business plan. I mean, I find, not so much today because the barriers to entry are so low, but it used to be people spend so much time on their business plan. And I think the business plans are good, right? Unfortunately, they all say the same thing. We all get rich in year five, right? But
Right.
I think somewhere along the line, you actually have to say, will you buy my product? Because that is the best validation is paying customers. I do a lot of M&A now, and people approach me and said, well, I really like to sell my intellectual property. I really like to sell my idea. And I always say, it's really not worth anything without customers because you haven't proven it out. There's a million ideas. There's a lot less people that have said, yeah, the customers buy this product and they keep coming back over and over again.
All right. Well, let's say that I want to circle back to Change Masters for a second. One of the things that you mention in that book that I think is pretty like a notable feature is the idea of 20 steps to execute a successful chain. You've already gone on record in this conversation about sort of an iterative process, but can you kind of cover from a bird's eye view perspective about what that process looks like and the 20 steps that you're talking about, generally
Yeah,
speaking?
I won't go through all the 20 steps, but it starts off, as I
Sure.
said before, identifying, what change you want to make. I remember when I was testing out the 20 steps, I went to my wife and I said, honey, here's a worksheet I think I'm going to include in my next book. Can you test it out for me? And the first question, she goes, what changes do you want to make? And she reads it, she goes, I don't need to make any changes. And that was it. So first you have to identify what change you want to make and why do you actually want to make that change, and what would it do for you and your business if you're actually able to affect that change, because that motivation will really drive you. And then I said before, it's what's the first thing, what's the second thing, what's the third thing, right? That's going to enable you to make that change, and what kind of rewards can I give myself when I take those tiny little steps and I get an outcome. I don't necessarily say when I get success, because success is not always immediate, right? I think these are a series of experiments, but when I get an outcome, what reward can I give myself? I mean, my reward of choice is either French fries or pizza. I can't help myself, right? But I think that we should get some kind of reward, and you just do that iterative process over and over again. The other very important part of the process is to try to have a mentor, to have someone to hold you accountable during this process. Because I find if you tell someone you're going to do something, you have much more chance of actually getting it done than if you just keep it to yourself. And they're actually a lot of times they're mutual mentors, right? People get together and they say, all right, this is what I'm going to accomplish this week. And then they get back next week and do we accomplish it? There's actually a whole business where people actually work together online for an hour and say, what am I going to accomplish in the next hour? And they're live on Zoom with them. People go do their work. And at the end of the hour, they say, well, did I actually accomplish what I said I was going to accomplish? So again, small steps, some kind of accountability, but also understand what's driving the change and what's going to happen if you don't make that change. Again, the fear of it.
Yeah, the accountability is huge, huge. And Tommaso, thanks for your comment here. He says, yeah, 100%. So, all right. So I do want to ask, like, I've touched on some random stories. I'm not the expert. You are. Like, can you share a couple of a situation or two where someone has been trying to figure it out, made a key change, and there was a really nice outcome for their business?
Sure. I would say about 5 years ago, I sold a business called Mystery Science. It was a science curriculum, supplemental science curriculum for elementary school. And my client Keith had been my client for about 20 years. I'd worked with him. I met him ever since he came out of college. This was probably the third business I helped him sell. And what he really figured out was how do you sell a supplemental curriculum to teachers without a sales force, right? To just do it through email and get the people who are actually using the product to refer other people and keep going, going, and going. So he figured this out. He was able to grow the business to multi-millions of dollars. And it was reported that the business sold in 2020 for $140 million, right?
Wow.
So he kept on iterating the experiment over and over and over again to see how he could do something without a sales force. Why the business sold was not because his curriculum was so great, which it was, but he was able to do it without people, just really just all automated. And so that was the key thing. But remember, he tested that thing over 4 or 5 years. This wasn't just, oh, I figured it out one day. He kept on testing, measuring, and he got a great outcome.
That's really amazing. Yeah, and you're right. Tommaso. Also, I'm gonna share this again because some folks are watching over streaming and can't see the chat. Noted that he identified the model and scaled it, which is key. Totally, absolutely, 100% true. And the mentor thing is not a small deal. Like if you're a small business person and you're looking for a mentor and you're trying to figure that part out, how would you go about uh, trying to find somebody who's open to being a sounding board?
You mentioned the thing called the mentor because if you ask every single entrepreneur, they will say the most important thing that helped them be successful is having a mentor. Because as they say, it is lonely at the top, and when you're not successful, you need someone to get you out of the funk. And when you are successful, you need someone to tell you you don't have the magic touch. Your shit does stink, right? You're still not as good as you think you are. So you need someone really on both sides. You got to decide whether what works for you is to have a paid mentor or an unpaid mentor. I think it should be someone that has some experience in your industry or at least in your business model, and that you can really relate to. It comes down to who can you trust, right? Not only for what you tell them, for what they tell you. And again, I don't think you should always take that person's advice, but I think you should consider it.
Yeah, it's not well, and it's if anything, I think one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs, small business and larger, it's very easy to get stuck in your own head, and it's nice to yeah, you need a little bit of grounding along the way. Okay,
So,
so we started by talking a little bit about um, AI. This isn't really an AI conversation, but I mean, it is a tool that's available. It can be used well, it can be used poorly. What are your thoughts or recommendations about leveraging AI for small businesses?
a couple of things. I use ChatGPT quite frequently, and a couple of bad uses of it is one of my clients hired a new vice president of operation, and I'm convinced that every single time we ask her a strategic question, she responds with a ChatGPT response, right? And it's just gobbledygook, right? It's numbered or it's bolted, it's all this other kind of stuff. So I don't think that's really a good use of ChatGPT. I think an excellent use of something like ChatGPT is to get an outline. Like if let's say you want to produce some content, have it produce some kind of outline or maybe the first draft, and then you revise it. If you're just using the ChatGPT words, again, I think it sounds mechanical and it loses heart. And so it's a problem. But let's say you want to put together a one sheet about your company from a marketing standpoint. You put a bunch of facts or figures or things like that in ChatGPT, have it start to produce the first draft of that. I think the key word here is have it produce the first draft of that. I also ask it for advice. Like if I'm trying to sell a company, I said, who are going to be the obvious buyers of this? I mean, you can ask it anything, but I don't think you should be dependent on as the final solution. That's one side of it. The other side of it is what becoming popular these days is AI agents, right? So what can you do inside your business that really could be automated by an AI and then use a specific industry AI agent that can do that task? Because remember the AIs always show up for work. They don't need raises, right? They don't take time off. And so if you can automate those things, that could go a long way, especially during recessionary times, to lower your costs.
Yeah, 100%. Totally makes sense. And it is one of those situations too where it's like it does require oversight. You need to like, and you have to, I would imagine, think through that from your consumer's perspective as well, right? Which is that like we can tell what feels like a bot conversation, or we can tell what feels like an AI response. So,
And sometimes it's
um,
wrong. And sometimes the chat GPT
sure.
is wrong, right? I was having an argument with my son about what was the Cubs record last year versus what the Cubs record was this year, right? And when I asked chat GPT, it kept giving me the Cubs record for this year, even though they said it was for last year. So it can make those kind of mistakes. So you got to be careful.
This sort of leads me to the next question. I assume that like business by business, industry by industry, not everybody is going to use the same stack, and so I'm not really asking you for an empirical list of small business stack, but I am interested. Are there some other tools out there that you have found helpful or seen some folks have success with?
I won't mention any specific tools, but I think it is important that you get something that is either like an all-in-one, especially if you're a small business, or you get something that's integrated that talks to each other, because you want to make sure that the sales system talks to your financial system. So when I'm talking to a customer, I kind of sort of know what they bought, right? Or I want the sales system, what they bought, I want them to talk to my marketing system. So I know how they behave when I sound out various marketing content. So if you can get some kind of integrated or all-in-one system, I think it really helps because having different silos, especially as you grow your business, really does hurt.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So I have just a couple other questions, and again, I'm just gonna throw this out to the folks who are actually sitting inside the room. If you guys have questions for Barry, feel free to drop those in the chat. But let's talk a little bit. We have touched on sales opportunities. We've touched on marketing. Let's talk specifically about the pipeline, like just general strategies for keeping your pipeline full if you're a small business or filling it up.
I think you have to understand that what the pipeline looks like, people go through three different stages. At the very top of the funnel, you have suspects, right? People that should be interested in what you're selling. The next stage is prospects, people that have raised their hand and said, hey, I'm interested in what you're selling. And then you have customers. Most small business owners are pretty good at converting prospects, people that have raised their hand and said, yeah, I'm interested, to actually getting to buy. Usually people have a 25 or 35% close rate. Where we're really not good is trying to convert suspects to prospects to try to identify people who could be customers and say, I'm interested. And that's really where marketing comes in. And that's why, in my opinion, marketing has to be an all the time thing because I actually don't think that we sell anything to anyone. We have to be there when people are ready to buy. So for example, if you look at the world right now, there are advertisements for e-bikes all around you. Now, if you're not in the market for an e-bike, you probably ignore them, which I did for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, I said to my wife, I ride a lot. Would you like to ride along with me with an e-bike? She said, sure. All of a sudden, I started seeing all these e-bike advertisements, right? Because I was then finally interested in buying. So this goes with also your suspects. Everybody, let's say you sell, let's say your HVAC service provider. If you do residential, every residential home in America or in your geography is probably your suspect, right? And so you have to continue to market these people, and when they have a problem, they will think of you as one of two or three people they're going to go to consider buying. I call that the maybe pile. If you're not in the maybe pile as a result of your marketing, you're never ever going to get the business. So marketing has to be an all the time thing. And unfortunately, what small business owners do is when they have no business, they go out and they do all this marketing so it gets them sales. Then as soon as they get sales, they go, oh, I got enough sales, let me stop doing marketing, right? And therefore their pipeline never stays full and their business keeps going up and down. I call it the double helix trap, where you only do marketing when you have no business and you stop doing marketing when you have sales. It's a problem.
Yeah, I can imagine. And one of those things that sort of keeps you on a weird off again, on again treadmill, which is can feel extra complicated, especially if you're wearing a lot of hats. Tommaso
Absolutely.
said that he agrees with you and that when we try to sell to everyone, we end up selling to no one. Totally makes sense. I think my takeaway from that from your last comment is just be keeping your antenna up with regard to the folks that you have recognized like what you're doing, like just
Yeah.
recognizing it.
Yeah. And Kevin, this also goes into what to really to focus on, the idea of productivity, because a lot of entrepreneurs want to be busy, but they're not productive. They're not really adding to the bottom line. And that's why they have a tendency to whatever you want me to work on, I'm all things to all people, because I think if I'm busy, then I'm successful, then I'm gonna make money. And that just is not the case.
Right, absolutely. Okay, we've talked a lot about we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked a lot about your past work. We've talked a lot about what you've written. Is there anyone else out there that you think is has a particularly interesting mind for or conversation around small businesses that you keep track of?
Yeah, I would mention two people. One is I'd mentioned Seth Godin, which many people probably know.
Sure.
Seth has a daily little newsletter or blog post that comes out. I find his stuff very, very interesting and very thought-provoking. He had one article about the art of storytelling, which was very, very interesting. The other person that I knew a long time ago and had a lot of success recently is a gentleman named Mike Michalowicz. He has a book called Profit First. And what I like about that book is, again, too many small businesses focus on sales and not enough people focus on, all right, let me get some profit. Let me pay myself first before I figure out how to pay other people. And let me put some money aside for me, because if I'm not making any money, it doesn't really make any sense to be in a business. This is not a hobby. We're trying to make a living doing that. So he's been very successful with the book called Profit First. And I think he does a really nice job.
Yeah, and profit first obviously is a principle. You hit the nail on the head uh, there for sure. Okay, so um, where can folks find you, find your work, find your writing, if they want to keep track of what you have to say?
Sure. So my website's just my name. It's barrymoltz.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I no longer participate in X. So you can find me. It's just at Barry Moltz.
Cool. All right. So you said that you are basically retired,
No,
except
I
for
didn't say I
I
was
don't.
retired yet. I
It's
got two
like
more years.
you got 2 more years. Okay. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, are there more books coming? Like, what are you working on?
Yeah. So I'm working on a family business book that I've always wanted to write. Over my years, I've worked with a lot of family businesses, and they're more interesting than just the ordinary business because you have a lifetime of personal relationships that get in the way of running a family business. I've seen some wonderful family businesses, and I've seen some violent family businesses that unfortunately ended in death. So I anonymize all that, and I try to in this book come up with what does it really take to run a successful family business. So that's the one I'm working on. It'll probably be the final book, and I'm really hoping my wife's going to read this one. She said she would.
All right. Well, not while she's on the e-bike, hopefully.
Exact. Well,
Uh,
listen, just to go back, Kevin, she's ridden the e-bike a total of one time. So, but that's a different story.
yeah, and probably a different interview, but
I was
Tommaso does
solving
have a
I
question.
was solving my pain. I wasn't solving her pain. So there's the issue.
That's fair. I think I have lived that with my wife as well. So we do have one last question. So
Sure.
Tommaso asks, what are some of the questions or prompts that you use to identify the pain point of the ideal avatar client?
I think that you have to ask people questions, right? And then you also have to look at their behavior, right? So you can ask people, so let's just think up whatever the business is. So let's say I have a bike shop, right? And so what pain do people have? Usually the pain goes along two ways. One is I want to buy a bicycle, or my bicycle's broken, I want it fixed, right? So I think I would structure my business in two different segments, right? People that can work on bicycles and people sell bicycles. And I will tell you, just like a car dealer, the money is to be made in fixing the bicycles or fixing the cars and not selling the new stuff, right? So I, as a small business owner, would focus more on the outreach of how can I help you fix your bike, rather than how can I sell you a new bike, because I don't really sell you a new bike too often. but I can fix your bike or tune your bike up all the time. Because what you have to remember is the more successful businesses are the ones that don't have to recreate or find new customers every single month. It's the one where there's some kind of annuity or revenue stream or repeat customer that comes back over and over and over again now that they are your customer. It's kind of like the razor and the razor blades, right? Harry's, if they sell you the razor, the little stand thing, you're going to come back and keep reordering razors over and over and over again. And so that's what you have to look at. Where is the ongoing revenue stream? Because if you have to go out and get new customers every single month, it's expensive. So that's really what I would focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Great advice and a sea of great advice. Thank you so much, Barry, for spending some time with us today. I've learned a ton. I look forward to the family business book, although it sounds like part of it's dangerous. Super
It's it's
fascinated by
it's
that.
it's very I didn't really anonymize a lot of different things. So but if I can help anybody in any way, you can just contact me. My email is my first name at my last name, so barry@moltz.com, and be glad to spend 15 or 30 minutes on the phone with you and try to solve whatever I can.
Amazing. Well, great getting a chance to visit with you. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, and we'll look forward to the next book and more success.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Have a great deal, everybody.